right, continuing on with sensitivity labels. Last session that we did, we talked about creating a label. We created a label called patient ID, and this time we are going to create a label policy so that gets deployed. Now remember, we talked about when a label is deployed, either through a label policy or an auto policy, which we'll talk about auto policies in another video. But those labels then, once they're deployed, they show up in your Office applications under sensitivity, and we can see these labels here that have been deployed. And so here in Purview, we're going to go back to Solutions, go back down to Information Protection, and remember we created the sensitivity labels down here called Patient ID. And this particular one, we put a lot of things in we might not normally do. Normally they might be more focused or more targeted, maybe to files or to emails or to meetings. In this case, we just kind of opened it up so that we can look at a lot of different options. But now we're going to take this policy, or this label rather, and we're going to publish this label. Now we're going to do a manual publish, which basically means that a user would see this label here and would need to go in. So for example, this document here, this is just a new document, and I have a default policy of Word of new documents that have this internal entire organization label here. If we click on this, we'll see that these sensitivity labels here. But I can go in and I can say, okay, well this one's not going to contain any public or any sensitive information, and so the user has the ability to go in and change the label here in this to public. Now I do require justification anytime a label is downgraded, and so we can then set that the label's not going to apply, etc. In any case, that's where, when we publish a label, that's where it ultimately will show up. Now it does take some time for that to happen. So what we're going to do is we're going to deploy and we're going to publish this particular label. So we're going to go to patient ID. And by the way, we can go to policies here and just look at label publishing policies, and we'll see that I only have one policy. And if I look at this policy, we'll see what labels are applied to this policy, or what labels are included in this policy. Pretty much all the labels I have up until now. What we don't see is that the label that I just created is not in here. It's not applied to a policy, and that's why we don't see it showing up in our available options under sensitivity. We do not see that, right? We see all these labels and these labels, right? But not that one. So what we're going to do is, and they can only be applied to a single label, a single policy for label. I can't put a label in multiple policies. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to say, we're going to go here and I'm going to do a publish label. And I'm going to choose the label that I'm going to publish. And the only one that's, well, the one I'm going to pick here is this patient ID, and we're going to add that. So that's the label that's going to be part of this policy. We're not going to do any admin units. We're going to click here. We're going to apply this to all users and groups. I can limit this down to, if I only wanted this particular policy to be applied to specific users, I can do that. But we're just going to go across the board here. And now I can say users must provide a justification to remove the label or lower its classification. We just looked at that. That's an option on this publishing policy. We can then require users to apply a label to their email. So we can say you have to apply a label to any email or to any document that you may have, or even require users to apply a label to their Fabric and Power BI content. Not going to do that right now, but I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad idea to require some label be applied to the content. Then we can provide users with a link to a custom help page. So if you have a SharePoint site or some site intranet somewhere that says, you have some instructions on labels and classification. anytime you're doing a manual policy, like you're pretty much relying on the user to apply labels in this case, it's good to have a very, very robust training program around that because it does require end user training. So we're going to click next here, and I'm going to, so here's where we can apply a default label to documents. So I'm going to say I want to apply, and then, by the way, this is the only label in this particular policy. If I want to say, all documents are going to have this default label. I don't necessarily want to do that, but I can go across here and inherit, apply default label to emails. I could say none, no default label, and then I could say if the email inherits the highest priority label from attachment. So if an attachment has a label attached to it, due to whatever either being applied or automatic, then I can say we can recommend labels, or I can make sure that the email gets inherited that same label. Not going to do that necessarily. We're just going to go next here, and then I can choose default label for meetings and require the users apply label to their meetings and calendar events. This is if you select required user to label to their meeting messages, documents, and meetings. Option earlier, we want to clear this checkbox to turn that requirement off for meeting and calendar invite. So I'm not going to do that in any case. I'm not going to do a default label here. But again, we can apply inheritance between the meeting itself and the artifacts that are in the meeting as well. So files and so forth that's attached to that particular meeting, we can apply, automatically apply the highest priority label. I would tend to agree with that. Apply a default label to sites and groups. We talked a little bit about sites and groups. This label enforces site level settings to protect sites and groups, but listen, this label will not be automatically applied to the files within the sites or groups themselves. To automatically apply default labels to files in SharePoint sites, consider setting up a default label for the document library. There's a knowledge article on that. So okay, and so we're going to click next here. And again, Fabric and BI, we can say what's the default label that's going to be applied there. Not going to apply that at all. Then we can give this a name, and we can call this patient ID label policy, and then give it some sort of meaningful description there. We're going to click next, and then we can click submit. And so now I am basically launching that that policy. And what we're going to see here is we're going to see that this is going to go through a little bit of a process to get it kind of geared up in all of the applications and so forth. But we're not going to. It does take a little bit of time for this to actually show up, and so I'm going to see if we get anything here. It usually does take some time, so we're not going to spend the time on that right now. But there's our label policy. That label policy will deploy one label. So essentially that label policy, since it's deployed to everybody, it will at some point show up in our Office apps as a label that we can attach to the files or emails. And then whatever controls we put in the label, which was a watermark and some access controls and those sort of things, will be applied to those documents as such. So anyway, that is how we create our label policy, and that's it. Until next time, hope this has been helpful for you, and thanks for watching.